The first thing Elias Boone heard was not a cry. It was a scrape. A small, stubborn sound came from beneath the ranch road, half buried under desert wind and the ticking heat of his old pickup. The monsoon storm had passed before dawn, leaving Copperthread Ranch smelling of wet creosote, stirred sand, and rusted wire. Brown water crawled through the low places. Cholla spines glittered with rain. Elias stood with one hand on the truck door and listened. Scrape, pause, scrape. At 61, he knew the ranch by sound alone. The creak of the north gate, the wind through mesquite, the complaint of the old windmill, the soft clunk of the chipped blue mug he always set too near the porch rail. But this sound did not belong to the ranch. It came from the concrete drainpipe beneath the washed-out bend. Elias took the dented lantern from behind the truck seat and stepped down the muddy shoulder. His boots sank with a soft suck. A jackrabbit burst from the greasewood and vanished. By the barn, Roscoe, his old red heeler, barked twice and then reconsidered. The pipe was blocked by tumbleweed, branches, and a torn feed sack. Something alive was trapped inside it. Elias lowered the lantern. Two amber eyes opened in the dark. They did not plead, they burned. He eased back, not from fear, but from respect. The animal crouched inside was a young female bobcat, rain-soaked and dust-caked, her spotted sides rising fast. One ear, the left one, had a torn notch near the tip. A pale broken whisker stuck from her muzzle, making her face look slightly crooked, though nothing about her felt weak. Even exhausted, she held herself like a blade. "Well," Elias whispered, "you picked a hard place to wait out weather." The bobcat flattened her ears and gave a low, rasping hiss. It was not mean. It was a wild body saying the only word it trusted: stay away. Elias obeyed. He set the lantern on damp sand and let the wind move between them. He could smell wet dust, cattle manure, and the green sharpness of desert plants after rain. A drop fell from his hat brim onto his wrist. For a moment, he thought of the kitchen sink, how it used to drip before Marion was gone. He had repaired it 3 days after she died because the sound had been unbearable. If this quiet story settled kindly into someone's evening, a gentle like or subscription would help keep such stories alive. And the circle gathered around them always welcomed hearing where others were watching from, and the name of an animal that once left a mark on their heart. Elias stayed still until the bobcat's eyes shifted away from the lantern. That was all she gave him. It was enough. He returned to the truck and pulled out the gray moving blanket behind the seat. Roscoe had claimed it one cold January night, and still looked betrayed whenever Elias used it. Marion would have said the dog had more opinions than the county board. The bobcat scraped again. Elias glanced toward the low adobe house, its porch light still glowing in morning. The place had looked smaller since Marion's passing, and smaller still since Claire had driven to Phoenix with boxes in her back seat. She called most Sundays, but their talks stayed safe. Weather, fuel prices, doctor appointments. Inside the pipe, the bobcat watched him. She tucked one hind leg under herself in a careful way. Not badly, maybe, but not right either. Her short tail flicked once, sharp as a snapped twig. Then she lowered her chin toward a shallow puddle, sniffed, and refused to drink while he was near. Proud thing, Elias thought. It did not sound like judgment inside him. It sounded familiar. He needed help. A trapped bobcat was not a barn cat under a porch, and kindness could turn clumsy when a man mistook wanting to help for knowing how. He climbed back up the slope and reached for his phone. The old pickup groaned when he leaned inside, as if personally offended by the storm. "You too?" Elias muttered, and his mouth almost remembered how to smile. Ranger Celia Mora answered on the fourth ring. "Celia," Elias said, "it's Boone out on Copper Thread. There's a bobcat in my road pipe. Young female, I think. trapped behind debris, wet, tired, still got plenty of temper. Celia was quiet for a heartbeat. Then he heard Keys. "If she's got temper, she's still fighting," she said. "Don't reach in. Keep dogs away. I'll bring a crate and a pole net, but we'll avoid using either unless we have to." I wasn't planning on reaching in. "I know, but people get brave when they get scared for something." Elias looked at his scarred, rope-lined hands. They were steady, though he did not always feel steady inside. "I'm not brave," he said. "That might help," Celia replied. After the call, he shut Roscoe in the tack room with breakfast and an apology. The dog stared over the half door with injured dignity. A string of hay stuck to his muzzle like a foolish mustache. Elias told him he was being heroic. Roscoe sneezed. Then Elias returned with a shallow pan of water and placed it near the pipe. Not inside, not close enough to corner her. 3 feet away, maybe 4. He judged the distance the way he judged skittish calves and grieving people, leaving more room than seemed necessary. The bobcat did not move. The lantern flame trembled. Water dripped somewhere in the pipe. A raven croaked from the telephone pole. Elias sat on a flat stone, mud drying pale on his boots. He did not hum. He did not whistle. The desert had taught him that silence could be shelter when used properly. Inside the pipe, the bobcat's whiskers twitched. Her eyes slid to the water, back to Elias, back to the water. At last, without trusting him, without surrendering 1 inch of wildness, she stretched her neck forward and took a single quick lap. Then she recoiled into shadow, ears flat. Elias looked away before she could think he had watched too closely. The porch light glowed behind him in the gray morning. Beneath the concrete, the little bobcat stayed alive. Elias did not know yet that she would make him cry. He only knew that for the first time in many months, the emptiness inside his chest had been interrupted by something small, fierce, and breathing. Before the bobcat came to the drainpipe, Elias Boone had been a man who measured days by chores instead of hopes. He rose before sunrise because cattle did not care whether a heart was lonely. He boiled coffee in the chipped enamel pot Marion had bought at a yard sale in Tucson, poured it into the blue mug with the hairline crack near the handle, and stood on the porch while first lights slid over the Rincon Mountains. Every morning, he tapped the mug twice against the porch rail before drinking. Marion had once laughed and said he was knocking to see if the day would let him in. After she was gone, he kept knocking. Copper Thread Ranch was not large by old Arizona standards. It held enough acres of scrub pasture, mesquite flats, dry washes, and red-fenced corrals to keep one stubborn man tired. Elias ran a small herd of cattle, repaired wind-damaged fences, hauled water when the wells complained, and sold a few gentle horses to families who wanted steady animals more than flashy ones. The ranch sat north of Marana, where the desert could look empty to strangers and crowded with life to anyone who knew how to look. Elias knew how to look. He saw kangaroo rat tracks like stitched thread beside the barn. He saw where mule deer crossed the losh before dawn. He noticed coyotes circling closer to the calving pens. He was not sentimental about wild things. He respected them, which was harder and cleaner than wanting to own them. Still, he had grown used to being alone with what he noticed. Marion had once filled the house with low singing and practical kindness. Their daughter, Claire, had inherited Marion's quick hands and Elias's quiet eyes. But after her mother's long illness, the ranch had become too full of absence for her. She moved to Phoenix 2 years before the storm, taking a job with a school district and promising to come back for holidays. She did come back sometimes. She brought groceries Elias did not ask for, checked the smoke alarms, and frowned at the old ladder in the tool shed. "You can't keep climbing that thing," she told him. "It still knows its work," Elias said. "So do rattlesnakes." That had made him laugh, which pleased her and embarrassed him. But when Claire left, silence returned quickly. It settled on the kitchen table, the unused rocking chair, the folded quilt at the foot of the bed. Elias did not resent it. He had simply learned to move around it, like a man around a sleeping dog. Roscoe helped, in his gruff and sideways manner. The old red healer had one cloudy eye and a grand opinion of his own importance. He followed Elias from corral to barn, pretending to supervise, then fell asleep with his head inside the shade of the feed bin. If Elias spoke too long on the phone, Roscoe sighed loudly. If Elias dropped a tortilla chip, Roscoe appeared as if summoned by prayer. One winter evening, Elias had found him under Marion's sewing table with a spool of white thread stuck to his collar. "You look guilty," Elias had told him. Roscoe looked away with tremendous dignity. Those small things kept the house from becoming only a place where memories sat down before Elias did. He had not always been so inward. As a young man, he could talk cattle prices and rainfall for hours at the feed store. He had danced badly at county weddings, and once drove all night to bring Marion a carved wooden cone from Nogales, because she had admired it for 3 seconds. Age had not made him cold. Grief had simply taught him to save words for places where they might matter. So when the storm rolled over Copper Thread Ranch that September, Elias watched it from the porch without speaking. Lightning stitched white over the flats. Rain hammered the tin roof so hard, Roscoe crept inside and lay on Marion's old braided rug, pretending he had chosen it for comfort rather than nerves. The air smelled of wet dust and electricity. The wash behind the barn filled quickly, growling under the rain. Elias stood with his hand around the blue mug, though the coffee had gone cold. He thought of Claire driving through city traffic. He thought of Marion labeling peach preserves in a kitchen bright with summer. He thought of all the things water could carry away before anyone knew to stop it. By midnight, the ranch road had become a ribbon of mud. The drainpipe under the bend swallowed water until weeds and branches snarled across its mouth. Elias checked the cattle with a flashlight and found them huddled under the far shelter, steaming gently in the cool rain. One calf had its head tucked backward against its mother, and the sight softened him more than he expected. "Smart little thing," he murmured. A barn swallow, confused by the storm, had taken refuge above the tack room door. Roscoe noticed it and decided, very solemnly, not to bark. Elias praised him for this restraint, and Roscoe accepted the praise as if he had saved the county. Nothing about that night told Elias that a young bobcat had been moving through the same storm, perhaps hunting along the wash, perhaps searching for higher ground, perhaps simply caught by sudden water. The desert kept its small emergencies hidden. It did not ring bells when fear entered a pipe. Near dawn, the rain thinned. Elias slept for less than an hour in the chair by the kitchen window, his boots still on, his hat over his face. When he woke, the world outside looked rinsed and bruised. Mesquite leaves shone dark green. Steam rose from the sand. A broken branch lay across the porch step, like someone had left him a question. He made coffee, because that was what morning required. He tapped the blue mug twice against the rail. The day let him in. Then he heard the scrape. Later, when he tried to explain why that sound had reached him so deeply, he could not. It was only a trapped animal under a road. Ranch life had trained him to handle trouble without ceremony. But some sounds found the hollow places in a person and settled there. That small scrape had entered the quiet he had built around himself. And once it was inside, Elias could not pretend the ranch was empty anymore. By the time Ranger Celia Mora's green county truck came down the ranch road, the morning had brightened without becoming warm. Clouds still hung low over the desert, and every wheel rut held brown water. Elias stood near the drain pipe with his hat in both hands. Not because he was nervous exactly, but because holding something kept him from doing the wrong thing with his hands. The lantern burned at his feet. Its glass chimney had fogged from the damp air, and the flame looked small and patient inside it. The bobcat had retreated farther into the pipe. Only her eyes showed now, two amber points set back in concrete shadow. Celia stepped out carefully, boots sinking a little. She was in her early 40s, compact and steady, with black hair braided down her back and a canvas field bag slung over one shoulder. Roscoe, locked in the tack room, issued one offended bark from the barn. Then, as if remembering his heroic assignment, he gave a much quieter second bark. Celia looked toward the barn. "He filing a complaint?" "He's writing the governor," Elias said. Her mouth softened, but she did not laugh loudly. Even kindness knew to lower its voice near a frightened wild animal. They crouched together near the pipe. Celia did not shine her flashlight straight into the bobcat's face. She angled the beam against the concrete wall so the light spread softly. The bobcat's outline appeared in pieces: wet spotted shoulders, narrow face, tufted cheeks, mud on her paws, that torn notch in the left ear. Her short tail gave one hard twitch. She opened her mouth without a sound, showing small white teeth that looked less like threat than last defense. "Juvenile female," Celia murmured. "Maybe last year's kitten, thin but not gone. Left hind looks sore." Elias nodded. He had noticed that leg, the careful way she tucked it under herself. "She hasn't tried to rush out," he said. "Can't tell yet if she's boxed in by fear or debris." Celia glanced at the tangled plug of branches wedged near the far side. Maybe both. A gust came across the wash and brought the smell of wet mesquite, cattle, and cold mud. Somewhere beyond the bend, loosened stones clicked down a slope. The bobcat's ears flicked toward each sound. She was listening to everything at once, building a map of danger in the dark. Elias admired that. He had spent 2 years doing much the same in his own way. Celia unfolded a small tarp, thick gloves, and a collapsible crate from the truck bed. She also brought a long-handled tool with a padded end, though she leaned it against the truck instead of taking it closer. "Best rescue is the one where she thinks most of it was her idea," she said. "That works on horses, too." "And widowed ranchers?" Elias looked at her. Celia held up one hand. "Too soon? Maybe by a decade." This time her smile came and went like a bird crossing shade. The bobcat made a low chuffing sound, not quite a growl, not quite a cough. Celia grew still. Elias grew still with her. They waited until the sound faded. A bead of water dropped from the pipe's rim into the pan Elias had left earlier. The tiny plink seemed enormous. The bobcat's whiskers trembled. One pale whisker stuck out at an angle, giving her fierce face a lopsided dignity. Elias found himself wanting to fix it, which was foolish. Wildness did not need straightening. "She's got a crooked whisker," Celia said softly. "Gives her character." "She's got plenty." Elias lowered his eyes so the bobcat would not feel stared down. He remembered Marion doing that with frightened colts. She had never needed to prove she was in charge. Animals seemed to know it, and because they knew, they often forgave her. For a moment, he missed her so sharply that the morning blurred. Then the scrape of claw on concrete pulled him back. "Does she have a way out on the other side?" Celia asked. "Pipe runs under the road and opens into the wash, but the wash piled up bad." "Let's look." They walked around the bend, giving the pipe mouth a wide berth. Elias carried the lantern, even though daylight had nearly won. The other end of the pipe was worse. Storm debris had sealed much of it. Desert broom, tumbleweed, a cracked piece of plywood from somewhere upstream, and a length of old baling twine caught like a snare around a branch. Mud packed the spaces between everything. No wonder the bobcat had scraped. She had been trying to dig through a wall the storm had built overnight. Celia knelt, touched the debris, and shook her head. "We'll open this side first, quietly. No sudden pulling if it shifts toward her." Elias set the lantern on a flat rock. I can cut the twine. With gloves. I'm old, not decorative. That remains under review. The line landed so dryly that Elias almost chuckled. It came out as a breath through his nose, and in the barn Roscoe barked once, as though applauding. They worked slowly. Celia clipped branches piece by piece. Elias lifted the cut brush away and laid it on the bank instead of tossing it. Each motion was careful, plain, and unglamorous. The kind of work that saved things often looked like yard work from a distance. Inside the pipe, the Bobcat went silent. That silence worried Elias more than the hissing had. Hissing meant fight. Silence could mean saving strength. Silence could also mean fear folding itself as small as it could. He crouched near the opening, not blocking it, and placed one palm flat on the damp sand. He did not know why. Maybe he wanted the animal to feel a living thing outside that was not rushing, not grabbing, not shouting. "You just keep your teeth to yourself," he murmured, barely louder than the wind. "We'll keep our hands to ours." From the darkness came one slow blink. It might have been nothing, a reflex, a trick of lantern light. But Elias saw it, and Celia saw Elias see it. Neither of them said a word. The Bobcat's amber eyes opened again, bright, furious, and terribly tired. Elias did not name her then, not aloud, and not even fully inside his own mind. But something about the black line of her torn ear against the pipe shadow stayed with him. Some creatures did not ask to be rescued. They simply endured long enough for someone patient to arrive. They opened the far end of the drainpipe the way people opened a door for grief, slowly, quietly, and without expecting gratitude. Celia cut the last snarl of baling twine, while Elias held back the branch it had tightened around. The plywood shifted with a wet sigh. Mud slumped. A ribbon of pale desert light entered the pipe from the wash side, touching the Bobcat's paws first, then the hard line of her shoulder. She did not run. For several seconds, she only stared toward the new brightness as if she mistrusted any freedom that arrived too suddenly. Her ears flattened. Her torn left ear made a small, jagged shadow on the concrete wall. Then she lowered her body until her belly almost brushed the damp floor, and crept forward one careful step. Elias backed away. Celia backed away too. No one cheered. No one clapped. Even Roscoe, still shut in the tack room, seemed to understand that the ranch was holding its breath. The Bobcat paused at the lip of the pipe. Rainwater dripped from the concrete behind her. Sunlight caught the mud on her whiskers and the pale broken one that angled away from her muzzle. She sniffed the air, reading it in layers: cattle, wet sand, humans, dog, mesquite, old iron. Then she sprang. It was not graceful. Her left hind leg faltered when she landed, and she staggered once in the mud. But she caught herself with a sharp twist, ears high now, eyes wide, short tail twitching in furious little beats. She bounded into the wash, vanished behind a creosote bush, and reappeared on a low bank to glare back at them. Celia exhaled. There she is. Elias kept his hands at his sides. He had imagined relief might feel bright. Instead, it felt tender and sore, like taking a boot off a bruised foot. "She's favoring that leg," he said. "She is," Celia answered. "But if she can move, we don't trap her unless she worsens. Less stress that way. I'll check nearby for a few days. You may see her again, or you may never see her." Elias nodded, though something in him resisted the second possibility. The Bobcat stood on the bank a moment longer. She did not look thankful. She looked offended by survival. Then she slipped into the gray-green brush and was gone. After Celia left, the ranch seemed to settle back into itself, but not completely. The road still bore the scrape marks from branches. The pan of water still sat near the pipe. The lantern glass was smudged with Elias's thumbprint. Roscoe emerged from the tack room and marched straight to the drainpipe, sniffed once, then sneezed as if personally insulted by Bobcat manners. "You wouldn't have fit in there anyway," Elias told him. Roscoe looked relieved that this had been acknowledged. That evening, Elias did something he would not have explained well to anyone. He placed a shallow bowl of clean water near the mesquite at the edge of the wash, 3 feet from the line where open ground became brush. He set it down, stepped back, and turned away without waiting. The bowl was an old white enamel one with a chipped rim. Marion had used it for peaches. Some things carried kindness better after years of ordinary use. He told himself the water was for any animal after the storm. That was mostly true. The next morning, the bowl was empty, though wind and birds could have done it. Mud around it was marked with prints: quail, rabbit, and one clear bobcat paw, round and neat, with no claw marks showing because bobcats walked with their weapons folded away. Elias crouched beside the track. "Well," he murmured, "you're particular." He refilled the bowl. This time he left a small piece of thawed quail Celia had approved from a rehabilitator's supply. Not too much, not daily, not enough to make the animal dependent. Help could become harm if it taught a wild hunter to wait for a porch. So Elias made rules for himself. Water when the heat rose hard after the storm. A bit of food only while the leg looked troubled. Only near the wash, never by the house, never from his hand. He wrote Celia's number on a feed receipt and pinned it beside the kitchen calendar. For 3 days, he saw nothing. He found signs instead. A faint paw print near the mesquite. A place where the sand had been pressed by a small spotted body. The quail piece gone, but the red plastic measuring cup he had accidentally left nearby dragged 6 feet away and abandoned under a prickly pear, as if judged useless. Elias picked it up, brushed off the sand, and laughed so softly he startled himself. On the 4th evening, she appeared. Elias was repairing the lower rail of the small corral when Roscoe stiffened beside him. The dog did not bark. He only made a swallowed whine and looked toward the wash. Elias followed his gaze. The bobcat stood in the lavender edge of dusk, half hidden behind mesquite. Her torn ear was unmistakable. Her coat had dried into tawny gold and charcoal spots. She was thinner than he liked, but her eyes had sharpened. Elias did not move. Roscoe's tail gave one nervous thump against the dirt. Elias rested 2 fingers lightly on the dog's collar. "Easy," he said. The bobcat watched them both. Then, with impossible delicacy, she stepped around a puddle instead of through it, as if muddy water had personally disappointed her. She came no closer than the bowl, 3 feet from the brush, 10 yards from Elias. A whole country of caution between them. She drank. Elias looked down at the broken rail, giving her privacy. The smell of damp wood rose from the corral post. A mosquito whined near his ear. Roscoe leaned against his boot, pretending not to tremble. When Elias looked again, the bobcat was gone. But the bowl had shifted, just turned sideways, as if she had nudged it after drinking. It became her habit after that. If she drank, she turned the bowl. If she refused, she left it straight. Elias did not know whether she meant anything by it. He only knew he began checking the bowl before he checked the weather. He did not call her Sable aloud, not yet, but the name had already found a quiet place inside him, dark and soft as her shadow moving along the wash. For the next week, Elias learned to move as if the wash had become a room with someone sleeping in it. He did not slam the truck door. He did not let the gate chain clatter when he crossed into the south pasture. He carried the water bowl with both hands, though it was light, because the carefulness reminded him to stay humble. Even his boots seemed to find a slower language, pressing into damp sand, pausing near stone, avoiding brittle sticks that cracked too loudly after the storm. The desert dried by degrees. At noon, heat lifted from the road in clear, wavering sheets. By evening, The air cooled enough to smell of dust, creosote, and sun-warmed cattle hide. Mesquite leaves turned silver on their undersides when the breeze moved through them. Elias watched the wash from the corner of his eye, the way a person watched a shy child at a gathering, noticing without trapping the moment with attention. Sable noticed everything. He had not spoken the name aloud, but it had settled in him. It suited the way she moved like a dark brushstroke. She appeared most often near dusk, never from the same opening twice. One evening, she watched from behind a prickly pear. Another, only her torn left ear showed above a low shelf of rock. Once, she climbed halfway onto a fallen cottonwood limb and sat there with her paws tucked neatly beneath her chest, looking offended by human tools. Elias was oiling a hinge at the time. "You don't approve," he murmured. Sable turned her head away, which he accepted as a fair review. Her hind legs still bothered her, though less each day. She placed it carefully on uneven ground, and often lifted it a little when she stopped. She hunted on her own. Elias found feathers and quick marks of pursuit near the brush. That eased him. A wild creature needed more than survival. She needed to remain herself. Celia came by twice to check tracks and watch the leg through binoculars. She approved of the water bowl, the limited feeding, and Elias's rule of never standing close enough to become part of Sable's expectations. "You're doing fine," Celia told him. Elias shrugged. "I'm mostly trying not to do wrong. That's better than most people start with." After she left, Roscoe sat beside the porch and gave Elias a long look, as if wondering when anyone would compliment him for not chasing the spotted visitor. Elias broke a plain biscuit in half and handed him the smaller piece by mistake. Roscoe noticed immediately. Elias traded him the larger one. "Fine," Elias said. "Senior management gets priority." Roscoe accepted the correction with dignity. On the 8th evening, Elias carried fresh water to the wash while the sky turned the color of old copper. The bowl had been turned sideways again, Sable's usual sign that she had come and gone. A thin line of sand had gathered against its rim. Elias rinsed it and set it back in the same place, 3 feet from the brush. Then he heard the faintest sound behind him. Not a scrape this time, a breath. He froze. Sable stood on the far side of a mesquite trunk, close enough that he could see individual drops of evening light caught along her whiskers. Her broken, pale whisker leaned away from the others. The torn notch in her left ear had healed into a rough little point. Her eyes were fixed on him, bright and guarded, but she had not vanished. Elias kept his gaze lowered to the ball. His heart beat hard, surprising him. He had faced loose bulls, flash floods, and the long quiet after a doctor's careful words. Yet this small animal standing 15 feet away made him feel as if one wrong breath could undo something fragile. He set the canteen down. The metal touched stone with a soft click. Sable flinched, but stayed. "Sorry," Elias whispered. He did not know whether apology meant anything to a bobcat. Maybe tone did. Maybe stillness did. Maybe nothing did. And he was only comforting himself. But grief often made people speak to rooms, photographs, empty chairs, dogs asleep under tables. Words did not always need to be understood, to be honest. Sable stepped once toward the bull, stopped, stepped back. Her tail flicked twice, the white underside flashing like a small torn flag. Then, with a quick sideways motion, she hooked one paw around a dry mesquite pod and batted it away from her path. The pod skittered toward Elias's boot. She watched it land, then looked up at him as if he had placed it there to test her patience. Elias almost smiled. He did not, because smiling showed teeth. The bobcat lowered her head and drank. She drank while he stood there. Not long, 5 laps, maybe 6. Then she lifted her face with water shining on her chin. For the first time, she did not retreat immediately. She remained beside the bull, shoulders low, body angled toward escape, but present. Elias looked slightly past her, toward the wash wall. The evening had gone quiet. Even the windmills seemed to hold back. From the barn, Roscoe gave one sleepy yawn that turned into a squeak. A quail called from somewhere in the brush. Elias's canteen rolled a half-inch on the stone and stopped. Then Sable blinked. It was slow. Not the quick blink of dust in the eye, not the hard closing of fear. Her lids lowered and rose with a weary, deliberate softness. She did not come closer. She simply let the world exist for one heartbeat without fighting it. Elias felt something loosen behind his ribs. He remembered Marion on the porch, palm open beside a frightened colt's muzzle, waiting as if time belonged to kindness. He remembered Claire at 7, holding a lizard in both hands, whispering that it could leave whenever it wanted. He remembered how many things he had loved best only stayed because no one forced them. "Thank you," he said, barely making sound. Sable turned the bowl with her paw, neat and firm, as if restoring the evening to proper order. Then she slipped into the mesquite and disappeared. Elias stood until the last copper light left the wash. When he returned to the house, he forgot to tap the blue mug against the porch rail before drinking. He noticed only after the coffee touched his tongue, and for once, the missed habit did not feel like loss. It felt like room. Daily life with Sable did not announce itself as daily life at first. It arrived in small repetitions, so ordinary Elias almost missed them. The white enamel bowl sat 3 feet from the wash, never closer to the house, never nearer the barn. Each morning he rinsed it at the pump, filled it halfway, and carried it down before the heat climbed hard. Each evening, he checked whether it had been turned sideways by one neat paw. Some days it had, some days it had not. Those were the rules of living beside a wild thing. Presence could not be ordered. Affection could not be scheduled. A man could only make the place safe enough to visit and humble enough to leave. September thinned toward October. The ranch dried into its familiar colors. Tan road, gray-green mesquite, rust-red gate, blue shadow under the hayshed. By noon, the air smelled of hot dust and old leather. At dusk, the wash cooled first, releasing the sharp green scent left by the storm. Crickets began testing their little fiddles in the weeds. The windmill turned in lazy complaints. Elias returned to his chores, but his attention had widened. He mended fence along the south pasture, while Sable watched from a ledge above the wash, only her amber eyes and torn left ear visible between 2 stones. He replaced cracked boards on the small corral gate, while she sat beneath a mesquite, short tail tucked close, pretending not to care. He hauled feed sacks from the truck, while she slipped behind the pump house, soundless except for the faint brush of fur against dry grass. She never approached when he faced her directly. If he turned his back and worked, she might remain. So Elias learned the courtesy of not looking too hard. Roscoe learned something too, though he considered it an unfair burden. When Sable appeared, Elias raised 2 fingers beside his leg, a quiet signal for stay. Roscoe would sit, trembling with importance, his cloudy eye fixed on the brush. He did not bark. He only made a tiny sound in his throat, like a tea kettle thinking about whistling. "You're doing county work," Elias told him once. Roscoe looked proud enough to need a badge. Sable seemed to understand the dog's restraint, though she did not reward it. She watched him with the intense suspicion bobcats reserved for anything loud, domestic, or too emotionally available. Once, when Roscoe sneezed in the dust, Sable sprang backward onto a rock, glared at him, and vanished with such offended speed that Elias laughed until his ribs ached. It was not a big laugh, but it was real. The ranch began collecting these small moments. There was the afternoon Elias left a strip of worn saddle leather on the workbench and found it gone before supper. 2 days later, He discovered it wedged in the fork of a mesquite branch near the wash, clawed, but not eaten, claimed and rejected in equal measure. He held it up and said, "You fixing tack now?" From the brush came no answer, though one spotted shoulder shifted in the shade. There was the morning. Sable refused to drink because a grasshopper had landed on the rim of the bowl. She crouched 6 feet away, staring with grave disapproval until the insect jumped off. Only then did she step forward, drink twice, and turn the bowl, as if correcting Elias's poor management. There was the evening a gust lifted Elias's hat from the fence post and rolled it through the dust. Sable chased it for exactly 3 bounds before remembering she was dignified. She stopped, sat down, and washed one paw as though the whole incident had belonged to someone else. Elias told no one about that one for a week. He kept it private, like a coin in his pocket. When Claire called on Sundays, he mentioned the Bobcat carefully. He did not want his daughter imagining him inviting danger onto the porch. "She comes by the wash," he said. "Comes by?" Claire repeated. "Dad, at a distance. That's what you say before you do something stubborn." "I've already done the stubborn part. I called Celia." The pause on the line softened. "You did?" "First thing." "Well," Claire said, "good." He could hear dishes in her Phoenix apartment and traffic beyond her window. He wanted to tell her the ranch felt less sealed shut, that one cautious blink had touched a place no conversation had reached. But a father could not always hand a daughter his loneliness without making it feel like a debt. So he said, "Roscoe's behaving. That's suspicious. He expects formal praise. Tell him I'm proud of his legal growth." Elias looked at Roscoe asleep with one paw in the empty feed scoop. "He'll be unbearable." After the call, the house stayed quiet, but not quite empty. Elias washed the blue mug and set it by the sink. He swept sand from the doorway. He noticed Sable's paw prints near the wash when he stepped outside. Clean round marks crossing quail tracks and vanishing into shadow. Her habits became a kind of conversation. Turned bowl, "I was here." Untouched bowl, "Not today." Leather strap moved, "Your belongings are poorly guarded." Deep prints near the bank, "I stood long enough to consider you." Elias knew he was making too much meaning from small signs, and he let himself know it. There was no harm in tenderness, he thought, as long as it did not ask the wild to become tame for comfort. He had spent years loving people by worrying over them. Sable required a cleaner love. Water placed down, distance kept, hands quiet, hope held loosely. One dusk, as he closed the barn, she appeared on the low road above the drainpipe where he had first found her. The concrete mouth was dry now, rimmed with brittle weed stems. Sable stood with her notched ear outlined against a fading peach sky. She looked larger than she had in the pipe. Not safe, never safe, but stronger. Elias rested one hand on the broken date latch and did not move. Roscoe sat beside him, heroic and miserable. The wind carried the smell of hay, iron, and cooling sand. Sable blinked once, then turned and walked along the wash as if she owned every shadow in it. Elias watched until the mesquite took her in. Then he went back to the house, tapped the blue mug twice against the porch rail, and listened to the ranch answer with crickets. The first evening, Elias left the barn lantern burning for Sable. He told himself it was for his own convenience. He had been sorting tack later than usual, standing in the open doorway while dusk pooled along the corral rails. The air smelled of hay dust, saddle soap, and the faint mineral coolness that rose from the wash after sunset. Moths tapped the lantern glass with tiny bodies. Far beyond the pasture, coyotes began speaking to one another in thin, rising calls. Elias hung the lantern on the nail beside the barn door instead of carrying it back to the house. It made a small circle of gold on the hard-packed dirt. Sable appeared at the edge of that circle 10 minutes later. She did not step into the light. She stood where light became shadow. One paw lifted, torn ear angled toward the barn. Her spotted coat almost disappeared against the mesquite and dry grass, but her amber eyes held the lantern glow. The pale broken whisker flashed once. Elias kept oiling a bridle as though he had not seen her. Roscoe lay beside a feed sack with his chin on his paws, under strict instruction to be a gentleman. His tail thumped once before he remembered the seriousness of his office. Elias touched the toe of his boot lightly to the dog's side. "Compose yourself," he whispered. Roscoe sighed so heavily that dust puffed from the floor. Sable's ears twitched toward the sound. Then she sat. It was the first time she had chosen to settle near the barn while Elias remained there. Not close, not tame, not his, but near enough that the lantern showed the curve of her cheek ruff and the small dark spots along her forelegs. She tucked her paws beneath herself and watched him with the patient suspicion of a creature allowing a human to continue existing under review. Elias felt joy arrive so quietly he nearly mistook it for peace. He did not speak. He only worked more slowly, running a cloth along the letter, checking buckles, laying each piece where it belonged. Marion had always said he cleaned tack like he was apologizing to it. She would have liked the lantern on Sable's face, he thought. She would have reminded him not to name the Bobcat too loudly, because names could become little ropes if a person was not careful. Still, inside his chest, the name stayed. Sable. The next evening, he left the lantern burning again. And the next. Soon the small circle of light became part of the ranch's routine. Elias would finish feeding, shut the tack room, set Roscoe in his honored place near the threshold, and hang the lantern on the same nail. He never carried food to it. He never called. He simply let the light exist. Sometimes Sable came. Sometimes she did not. When she did, she seemed less interested in Elias than in the life around him. She watched beetles cross the dirt with her head tilted low. She snapped once at a moth and missed, then looked away quickly, as though no respectable bobcat had been involved. She sniffed Elias's boot print after he had moved away, wrinkled her nose, and sneezed 3 delicate sneezes in a row. Elias had to press his lips together. "You're not wrong," he murmured later, when she had gone. "Those boots have seen some things." One night, she found a loose coil of baling wire beside the wall and hooked it with a paw. The wire rolled with a soft metallic whisper. Sable leapt straight up, landed sideways, then swatted the coil twice to punish it for moving. Roscoe watched entranced, while Elias looked down at the bridle in his hands and pretended the corner of his mouth was not moving. Another evening, Claire called while Elias sat on the porch after chores. The lantern glowed by the barn, and Sable's small silhouette rested beyond it, a shadow shaped like patience. "You sound different," Claire said. "Do I? A little. Maybe the weather's better." "It's Arizona, Dad." He watched Sable lift one hind paw and scratch carefully beneath her chin. She stopped halfway through, staring into the dark as if she had heard a secret under the earth. Then she resumed. Elias smiled into the phone. "What?" Claire asked. "Nothing. A bobcat's got an itch." There was silence. Then Claire laughed softly. It came through the line tired and dear. "You're really watching a bobcat scratch herself?" From a respectful distance. "I hope she appreciates your manners." "She does not." "Good. That sounds healthy." After they hung up, Elias remained on the porch longer than usual. The blue muck sat warm between his palms. For years, evenings had been the hardest part of the day. Morning had work, noon had heat, night had sleep if he was lucky. But evening opened a space where Marion's absence came through the walls and sat beside him. Now, some evenings, that space held other things too. The lantern, Roscoe's sleepy snore, the sound of Sable turning the enamel bowl near the wash before walking to the edge of the barn light. He knew better than to call it healing in any large way. Healing did not stride in with banners. It came like a bobcat, choosing the edge of the light, leaving when it pleased, asking only that a man not chase it. One night, the wind picked up after sunset and made the lantern flame lean hard against the glass. Elias went to steady it. Sable was already there, sitting just beyond the glow, eyes narrowed against blowing dust. A dry leaf had caught on one of her cheek tufts, and for a moment she looked so severe and ridiculous that Elias had to turn his face toward the barn wall. The leaf stayed there until she shook herself. Then she rose, walked to the water bowl, drank, and turned it with her paw. Before slipping back toward the wash, she paused by the edge of the light. Her body remained angled away, ready to vanish. But her head turned toward Elias, and she gave one slow blink. Elias stood with his hand on the lantern handle. "Evening, Sable," he whispered. It was the first time he said her name aloud. She did not come closer. She did not soften into anything that belonged to him. She only looked once toward the sound, then stepped into the dark mesquite. But Elias carried the lantern back to the house that night as if it had been lit from the inside. The warning signs did not arrive like warnings at all. They came folded inside ordinary days, hidden beneath the same desert light, ranch dust, and lantern glow Elias had begun to trust. October settled over Copperthread Ranch, with cool mornings and long, bright afternoons. The cattle moved slowly through pasture, hooves lifting little puffs of powder. At dawn, the wash smelled of stone, dry grass, and the faint sweetness of crushed creosote where deer had passed. Elias noticed the first small change while carrying the water bowl back from the pump. Sable's track near the bank was uneven. Just one print pressed shallower than the others, the left hind set carefully to the side. He crouched beside it. The sand held her path clearly. Round forepaws, neat hind paws, no claw marks, then a half drag where she had turned toward shade. He ran one finger beside the print without touching it. "Still troubling you," he murmured. Roscoe stood behind him, nose lifted, solemn whenever Elias examined the ground. A beetle crawled over the dog's paw. Roscoe looked down, offended, then stepped aside with great dignity. Elias would have laughed on another morning. That morning, he only scratched the dog between the ears. At dusk, Sable came to the lantern, but did not sit. She stood beyond the circle of gold, body low, torn ear angled toward the far arroyo beyond the windmill. Her pale, broken whisker caught the light when she turned her head. Elias was cleaning a cinch strap by the barn door, and he kept his hands moving slowly, though every part of him had gone still. She lifted her left hind paw once, held it tucked close to her belly, and set it down again. Then she stared past the ranch. Not at Elias, not at Roscoe, not at the bowl. Toward the long cut of dry country where the wash narrowed between rock shelves and old Palo Verde roots. The place coyotes often used before sunrise. The place stormwater had rushed hardest on the night she was trapped. Elias followed her gaze. The desert gave nothing back but dusk. The next morning, the bowl had not been turned. The water sat untouched, a film of dust on top. A honeybee rested on the rim, drinking without ceremony. Elias rinsed it, filled it again, and placed it in the usual spot, 3 feet from the brush, same as always. But the distance felt different when no paw had moved it. He told himself she had hunted elsewhere. Wild things ranged. Wild things owed no schedule. By noon, he had repeated that thought until it had worn smooth. Celia came by that afternoon to check a report of javelina near the county road, and Elias mentioned the uneven prints with the practiced casualness of a man pretending not to worry. "She may have strained it again," Celia said, studying the sand. Or she may be moving more because something pushed her out of her usual cover. Coyotes? Maybe. Maybe another bobcat. Maybe nothing. This time of year, territories shift. Young ones learn the hard edges of the map. Elias looked toward the arroyo. Celia glanced at him. You know she might leave. I know. But knowing was not the same as being ready. That evening, Sable came late. The lantern had burned low, and moths had stopped coming. Elias was about to take it down when Roscoe raised his head from the feed sack and made his tea kettle sound. Sable appeared beside the hay shed, too close to the barn. Elias froze with one hand on the lantern hook. She had never chosen that route before. Her shoulders moved in a slow ripple beneath her spotted coat. Burrs clung to one flank. Dust whitened her paws. She looked larger in shadow, but tired, as if the desert had asked more from her than usual.
The Bobcat
She did
begins
not
its
drink.
cautious patrol through the
Instead,
cold
she
morning
crossed
air.
to the workbench where Elias had left an old leather glove. With one quick paw, she hooked it, dragged it halfway off the bench, and let it fall. Then she stared at it. The glove lay palm up in the dirt, like a small defeated animal. Roscoe looked at Elias with wide concern, as though the household had suffered a theft of historic importance. She always takes the useless things, Elias whispered. But Sable did not back the glove or carry it away. She only stood beside it, breathing lightly, ears turning toward sounds Elias could not hear. Then she gave a sudden low growl toward the dark beyond the windmill. The sound lifted the hair on Elias's arms. He had heard her hiss in fear, chuff in warning, and cough softly at dust. This was different. This was a message aimed outward, past him. The bobcat's body lengthened. Her whiskers pushed forward. Her short tail twitched, once, twice, then went still. From far off, a coyote answered with a thin yip. Sable vanished so quickly, the glove stirred in the wind of her leaving. Elias stood under the lantern until the dark swallowed the wash. He thought of Marion then, not in the sharp way grief first came, but in the tired way it returned when something fragile seemed beyond reach. Marion had trusted life more easily than he did. She had believed that loving something did not give a person the right to keep it from danger. Elias believed that too. He had built his whole careful routine around it. Still, his hands ached with the wish to build walls around the wash, around the mesquite, around one notched ear, moving through night country. The next day, Sable refused the water again. Elias found only one sign. The leather glove had been moved from the barn dirt to the edge of the wash, placed crookedly beside the enamel bowl. He did not know whether she had dragged it there in play, irritation, or some bobcat reason beyond human reading. Roscoe sniffed the glove, then sneezed so hard he sat down. "That's your official opinion?" Elias asked. Roscoe blinked, dignified and dusty. Elias picked up the glove and set it on the fence post. He tried to make the gesture light, tried to let the small humor hold. But when evening came, and Sable did not appear at the lantern, the ranch seemed to listen too hard. Beyond the windmill, the arroyo lay dark, and somewhere in that darkness, something had begun to trouble her. The night Sable disappeared, the desert wind came down cold enough to make the old barn boards mutter. It began after sunset, not as a storm, but as a long, restless breath from the north. Sand whispered against the porch steps. The lantern flame leaned sideways in its glass. Elias had tied the loose gate chain with a strip of cloth so it would not bang. But every few minutes the wind found some other piece of metal to worry. He stood in the barn doorway with his jacket buttoned wrong and did not notice until he reached for the pocket knife that was not where his hand expected. Roscoe sat beside the feed sack, ears low, watching the darkness beyond the windmill. "You hear her?" Elias asked softly. Roscoe did not look at him. That was answer enough. The lantern made its usual circle of gold on the dirt, but Sable did not come to the edge of it. The water bowl waited by the wash, straight and untouched. The old glove still hung on the fence post where Elias had placed it. Twice he thought he saw movement near the mesquite, and twice it became only wind shifting dry branches. He stayed longer than he should have. The cold crept into his knees. The smell of dust and hay sharpened as the temperature fell. Somewhere far off, coyotes called and stopped all at once, which was worse than hearing them continue. Silence spread over the ranch in a thin, hard sheet. Elias took one step toward the wash. Roscoe rose with him. "No," Elias said. The dog froze, miserable. Elias knew the rules. He had made them himself. No chasing into the brush, no pushing into her hiding places, no turning care into pursuit. But rules felt clean only when fear was not standing beside them, breathing into their ear. A faint sound came from beyond the windmill. Not a cry, not exactly. A short, rough rasp, swallowed by the wind. Elias lifted the lantern. Sable? The name barely left his mouth. It sounded too small in the open dark. For a heartbeat, something moved near the old arroyo fence. Low, quick, spotted. Then it vanished behind the shadow of the windmill tower. Roscoe gave a strangled whine. Elias saw one flash of amber eyes. Then nothing. That took more strength than running would have. He stood with the lantern raised, every part of him reaching toward the dark, while his boots stayed planted in the dirt. The wind rattled through the windmill blades, making them clack once, twice like old teeth. After several minutes, he walked to the water bowl. It was still straight. Beside it, pressed into the sand, was one clear paw print, and then a staggered drag where the left hind foot had slid. Elias crouched, lantern low. The print pointed away from the barn, toward the arroyo. A burr cluster lay beside it, caught with a few tawny hairs. His throat tightened. "Easy," he whispered, though he did not know whether he spoke to Sable, Roscoe, or himself. The bobcat was not there. He searched only the open places that night, because Celia had told him never to follow a frightened, injured animal into cover after dark, unless there was no choice. He walked the road bend, the dry edge of the wash, the windmill path. He kept the lantern low, and his voice lower. Roscoe walked at heel with trembling obedience, stopping every few yards to sniff the air and look back at Elias, as if asking permission to become younger and foolish again. Near the drainpipe, Elias found old storm debris still piled on the bank, pale in the lantern light. He remembered her eyes inside the concrete, fierce and exhausted. He remembered the slow blink. He remembered the first time she had sat near the barn light, as if the ranch had become a place she could judge safely from the edge. Now the pipe was empty. The wash was empty. The lantern circle was empty. At the broken gate latch, Elias paused. The strip of cloth he had tied there had come loose and fluttered like a small white flag. When he caught it, his fingers were stiff with cold. He tied it again, twice as carefully, though the gate no longer mattered. Warmth tried to survive in little ways. Roscoe leaned against his leg without being asked. A pocket of hay beside the barn still held the day's heat when Elias touched it. On the porch rail, the blue mug waited where he had left it after supper, and when he finally picked it up, a moth crawled drowsily around the rim as if the world had not shifted at all. He carried the mug inside, but did not drink. The house seemed too bright. The kitchen clock ticked with cruel cheerfulness. Marion's braided rug lay flat and patient by the door. Elias stood in the middle of the room, lantern in one hand, untouched mug in the other, and felt the old loneliness come back with a new shape. He had told himself not to need Sable. He had meant it. A wild animal could not be asked to fill a human house. She had never promised to visit the lantern, never promised to turn the bowl, never promised to live at the edge of his grief, where he could watch her and feel less alone. She had only survived near him for a while. Still, the absence hurt like a sound, ending too soon. Before bed, Elias called Celia and left a message. His voice stayed calm because that was how ranchers spoke when worry had nowhere useful to go. "It's Boone. She's gone toward the arroyo. Left hind dragging some. Cold wind tonight. I'll check at first light." He hung up and looked toward the window. Outside, the lantern by the barn had gone out. Elias pulled on his coat again, stepped into the cold, and walked back across the yard to relight it. Not because Sable would see it. Not because light could call back a bobcat that had chosen shadow. Because somewhere in the dark country, she had once learned that this small glow meant no one here would chase her. And if she was afraid, Elias wanted at least that much to remain true. At first light, Elias found the ranch covered in a thin silver frost that would vanish as soon as the sun touched it. It glittered along the fence wire, on the rim of the water bowl, and across Roscoe's whiskers when the old dog pushed his nose through the door. The desert looked gentler than it was in that hour, all pale breath and quiet stones. Cold air carried the smell of creosote, iron, and ashes from the stove. Elias had slept in his chair with his boots on. The blue mug sat beside him, untouched and cold. Celia arrived before the sun cleared the hills. She brought coffee in a paper cup, a thermal blanket, a field kit. Mateo Vargas came not long after, driving his tan pickup with one headlight dim. He owned the neighboring pecan place. "Heard from Celia," Mateo said. "Figured 3 pairs of eyes beat one." Roscoe sniffed his boot, then sneezed. Mateo looked down. "Morning to you too, Sheriff." Elias almost smiled. They began at the bowl. Frost around it had cracked where something small had passed during the night, but wind had confused the tracks. Sable's prints led away from the wash, then disappeared on stony ground. Celia crouched with her braid over one shoulder. She was moving slow, she said. Elias looked toward the arroyo. How slow? Slow enough to worry, not slow enough to give up. That helped and did not help. They followed the route with care. Celia read the ground. Elias knew the ranch's hidden paths. Mateo spotted bent grass. Roscoe stayed on a short lead, insulted by the loss of professional freedom, but he worked with surprising seriousness. Once he stopped beside Brittlebrush and stared so firmly that Celia found 2 faint bobcat hairs caught on a thorn. "Good dog," she whispered. Roscoe looked at Elias as if asking whether this praise counted toward biscuits. "It counts," Elias said. The trail moved beyond the windmill, where the blades turned slowly with a dry creak. Sable's path dipped into the arroyo, then climbed out near a shelf of red stone. There they found coyote tracks, crossing over hers. Elias felt the world narrow around those marks. Celia touched his sleeve once. "Tracks don't tell the whole story. I know. But they told enough to make a man quiet." The arroyo was a hard place to search. Mesquite roots twisted from the banks like dark fingers. Prickly pear leaned over narrow cuts. Dry grass hid holes deep enough to turn an ankle. The cold lifted slowly, replaced by clear sunlight that made every shadow sharp. A cactus wren scolded them from a cholla skeleton. At mid-morning, Mateo found the leather glove. It lay under a palo verde, half buried in sand. Elias stared at it before picking it up. The glove was stiff with dust, its fingers marked by tiny punctures where Sable had carried or dragged it. Why she had taken it from the fence post, he did not know.
And with it,
Maybe the wind had
relentless
thrown
rain.
it. Maybe she had pulled it along in one of her private games. Maybe she had carried the smell of the barn into the dark with her. That last thought hurt most. He folded the glove into his coat pocket. "She liked that ugly thing," Mateo said gently. "She had poor taste. Then she would have liked my first truck." Celia smiled faintly. Even Elias let out one short breath of laughter, small but real. They searched until noon. They found places where Sable had rested. One oval pressed into dry grass. One ledge dusted with paw marks. One hollow beneath a mesquite, where the sand still held the faint shape of her body. Elias knelt there. It smelled of dust and wild musk. He could picture her with her paws tucked under, amber eyes open, listening to coyotes and wind. She was here, he said. Yes, Celia answered, but she was not there now. Near the county road they found tire tracks, cutting across the wash after the storm. Ranch roads invited foolishness. Hunters, teenagers, lost drivers, people who thought open desert meant empty desert. The tire marks clipped the edge of a sandy bank, where Sable's prints scattered suddenly, then regrouped.
The Bobcat
She may have been startled, Celia said. Elias
air.
imagined headlights, engine noise, a wounded leg trying to move too fast. He closed his hand around the glove in his pocket. The sun climbed high. Heat returned. The frost was gone, as if morning had never happened. By afternoon, even Roscoe's determination began to sag. Mateo shared water from his canteen by pouring a little into his cupped palm. Roscoe drank, then looked offended that no one had brought a proper dish. Mateo apologized formally. Elias was thankful for the ridiculousness of it. They pushed farther than Celia wanted, then stopped, because she was right. Searching too hard could drive a hiding animal deeper into danger. They left water at 2 shaded places near the arroyo, marked the locations, and walked back toward the ranch in a silence that grew heavier with every step. At the drainpipe, Elias paused. The concrete mouth looked harmless in daylight. Dry weeds brushed its rim. The road above held tire tracks and boot prints. He remembered the scrape that had called him out of himself. He remembered amber eyes refusing pity. He remembered how carefully she had turned the bowl, as if the ranch needed her small corrections. Mateo touched his hat. "I'll keep an eye along my fence." "Thank you," Elias said. Celia stood beside him after Mateo left. "Call me if she shows, if you hear anything, if Roscoe alerts." "And Elias?" He looked at her. "You gave her room. That matters, whether she comes back or not." Whether she comes back. The words stayed with him after her truck disappeared in dust. That evening, Elias filled the enamel bowl and placed it in its usual spot, 3 feet from the brush. He hung the lantern by the barn. He set the battered glove on the workbench, though it felt changed. Roscoe lay beside the feed sack and kept watch until sleep overtook him. Elias stood under the lantern a long time, listening to the desert arrange itself for night. Crickets started. The windmill clicked. Somewhere far off, a coyote called once and went quiet. The bowl remained straight, and Elias, who had promised himself never to ask a wild thing to stay, found that the asking had been happening silently inside him all along. Dawn came pale and windless, as if the desert had spent all its strength in the cold night before. Elias woke before the kitchen clock could strike 5. He had not slept much. The chair had left a stiff ache between his shoulders, and the blue mug sat on the table, washed now, turned upside down on a towel. He had cleaned it at midnight because his hands needed a task. Outside, the ranch held its breath. The first light touched the tops of the mesquite, then the windmill, then the barn roof silvered with dust. Roscoe stood at the door without wagging, nose lifted, cloudy eye narrowed toward the yard. The old dog made no sound. That worried Elias more than barking would have. He opened the door. Cold air moved around his boots. It smelled of metal, dry grass, and faint wood smoke. Near the barn, the lantern still burned low, its flame no bigger than a bean behind smoky glass. Then came a sound from beside the windmill. Not the coyote, not the hinge, not any bird Elias knew. A rough, breath-thin cry. Roscoe stepped forward, and stopped at Elias's two-finger signal, every muscle in him arguing with obedience. Elias touched the dog's head once. "Stay with me," he whispered. They crossed the yard slowly. At first, Elias saw nothing but the long legs of the windmill tower and the gray tangle of brush beyond it. Then a shape moved at the base, low and spotted, almost part of the shadow. Sable. She stood with her body angled toward the arroyo, but her face turned toward him. She looked smaller than she had 2 nights before. Dust dulled her coat. Burrs clung along one side. The notch in her torn left ear seemed sharper against the morning. Her left hind leg hovered before she set it down, and when she breathed, her ribs showed too clearly beneath the fur. Elias stopped so abruptly, Roscoe bumped his boot. For a second, joy rose in him too fast, hot enough to hurt. He wanted to step closer. He wanted to say her name loudly. He wanted to tell the empty wash and the old gate and all the sleepless corners of the house that she had come back. He did none of those things. He lowered his eyes. "Morning, Sable," he said, barely above a breath. The bobcat answered with a rasping chuff, then turned away. She took 3 limping steps toward the windmill's concrete pad, stopped, looked back. Elias did not understand at first. Sable stared at him with hard amber impatience. Her short tail flicked once. Then she moved again, slow but deliberate, passing under the windmill, where the ground dipped toward a narrow service path Elias had not used in months. He had meant to clear it after the monsoon. Like many lonely men, he had kept a list of things to do, and let the list become a kind of weather. Roscoe whined softly. Sable froze. Elias lifted 2 fingers again. Roscoe sat so fast, his hindquarters hit the dirt with a thump. He looked wounded by his own goodness. Even in that tense hour, Elias found a small warmth in it. "You'll be unbearable after this," he murmured. Sable watched the dog, decided he remained ridiculous, but stationary, and continued. Elias followed from a distance, stopping whenever she stopped. The service path curved past the windmill and toward a shallow cut behind the old hay shed, where storm water sometimes pooled before sinking into sand. The morning light had not reached that hollow yet. It smelled of damp earth, rust, and crushed Palo Verde leaves. Halfway there, Sable swayed. Elias's hand tightened around the lantern handle, though the flame was nearly gone. His chest clenched with the old helplessness he remembered from hospital rooms and late-night phone calls, from watching Marion sleep in a house full of medicines. He had learned then that love could stand beside suffering and still not be allowed to fix it. Sable took another step, then another. At the edge of the hollow, she turned to him again. She did not blink this time. She looked straight at him, fierce and exhausted, and made that rough, breath-thin cry once more. It was not for food. Elias knew it in the center of himself. He stopped near a creosote bush, far enough back that she could flee, close enough to see the trembling in her whiskers. The pale, broken one angled out like a question mark. "What are you showing me?" he whispered. Sable lowered her head and slipped into the shadow beneath the hayshed's back overhang. Elias stayed where he was. Every instinct in him wanted to follow. Every promise he had made to Celia, to the animal, and to his own better sense told him not to crowd her. He stood with Roscoe sitting rigidly beside him, the dog's tail sweeping one nervous little arc in the dust before he tucked it still. From under the overhang came a faint rustle. Sable reappeared almost at once, but instead of retreating into the wash, she crossed to the old glove Elias had left near the barn after the search. He had not noticed when the wind carried it this far, or maybe she had moved it. She hooked it weakly with one paw and dragged it 2 feet toward the hollow, then dropped it. A glove. A foolish old glove. A signal, maybe. Or only a bobcat's private habit. Elias felt his throat close. "You came back for help," he said. Sable did not soften. She stood over the glove, ears lifted, body trembling with the effort of remaining upright. Then she turned the enamel water bowl, which Elias had set nearby the previous evening, with one careful push of her paw. Sideways, her old sign, "I was here." Then, as if that message had used the last of what she had, she lowered herself onto the cool dirt beneath the windmill's shadow. Elias backed away one step, then another. He did not run to her. He ran only when he reached the porch, where distance gave him permission. He called Celia with hands that finally shook. "She's back," he said when Celia answered. "She's at the windmill. She's trying to show me something." Behind him, through the open door, Roscoe remained seated in the yard like a small red statue guarding the dawn. And under the old hay shed, hidden in the half-light, the desert kept its next secret just out of sight. Celia arrived with her truck lights off, letting the pale morning do the announcing. Elias met her near the porch, one hand on Roscoe's collar, though the old dog had already shown more self-control than anyone had a right to expect from him. Celia carried her field bag, a folded canvas screen, and the calm face she used when an animal's fear mattered as much as its wound. She did not hurry toward Sable. She stopped first, listened, then looked at the ground. The ranch was full of small sounds. The windmill creaked. A fly worried the rim of the water bowl. Somewhere beneath the hay shed's rear overhang, Sable breathed with a faint, dry rasp. "She's under there?" Celia asked. Elias nodded. "She led me to it." Celia's eyes shifted to him, then back to the shadowed hollow. "Then we listen to what she's asking, without deciding too quickly." That became the rule for the day. They moved around the hayshed slowly, not closing off the exits. Celia set the canvas screen several yards away to block the worst of the wind. Elias carried fresh water and placed it near the same line Sable had chosen, 3 feet from cover, never closer. When he bent, Sable's amber eyes opened in the dark, her torn ear lifted. Her whiskers pushed forward. She hissed once. It was a thin sound, tired but honest. Elias backed away immediately. "Still got opinions?" "Good," Celia said. "Opinions are encouraging." Roscoe, tied near the porch with a bowl of his own, gave a single soft bark, as if volunteering his opinions too. Mateo, who had come after Celia called him, tipped his hat toward the dog. "Committee's getting loud," he whispered. Elias almost smiled. In the middle of fear, the small foolishness helped him stand upright. Celia watched Sable through binoculars from the barn corner. She did not reach in. She did not try to pull the bobcat out. The left hind leg was sore, maybe strained, perhaps bruised from a bad leap or a startled run. Sable was thin and worn down, but her eyes remained clear, and she could lift her head. The safest thing, Celia decided, was a sheltered recovery with distance, water, and careful monitoring, unless her breathing worsened or she stopped responding. "She chose cover," Celia said. "We should not punish her for choosing wisely." Elias held those words. He had spent so much of his life doing care with his hands. Fences, feed, water lines, blankets over sick calves, Marion's pillows lifted behind her back. Standing away felt like doing nothing, and doing nothing felt close to failure. But when Sable watched him from the shadow, tense and determined, he understood that his nearness could cost her strength she needed for herself. So he worked at a distance. He opened the hayshed's front doors to improve air without exposing the back hollow. He moved the feed sacks quietly so mice would not gather near her. He swept the barn aisle with slow strokes, each brush of straw against dirt soft as a hand over cloth. The air filled with hay dust and warm wood. A sunbeam stretched across the floor and caught Roscoe's abandoned biscuit, which the dog noticed from 40 feet away with tragic longing. You already had breakfast, Elias told him. Roscoe lowered his head as if suffering had entered history. Mateo brought a small battery camera from his pecan barn and mounted it high on a post, facing the hollow from a respectful angle. For observation, he said, not fame. Sable disliked the camera immediately. She stared at it for 5 full minutes, then turned her back with icy judgment. Celia said that was probably acceptable medical feedback. By afternoon, Sable drank. She waited until all 3 humans had moved away. Then the camera showed her emerging just enough for her head and forepaws to appear. She kept her body low, left hind leg tucked awkwardly, and lapped water with quick, sharp movements. Afterward, she turned the ball sideways with one paw. Elias saw the footage on Celia's phone and felt his chest ache. She's still correcting us, he said. That may be her main treatment plan, Celia replied. For the next days, the ranch softened around her. Elias changed his route to the south pasture so he would not pass the overhang too often. He oiled the gate latch until it no longer clicked. He left the lantern burning at the barn door, but dimmed it with a strip of tin so the glow did not shine directly into her shelter. He spoke less, not because he had less to say, but because quiet had become part of the medicine. Sometimes Sable watched him. Sometimes only the notch of her ears showed in shadow. Once, he found the old glove dragged to the very edge of the hollow. It lay there like an offering or an accusation. Elias picked it up only after Celia said Sable had moved away for water. He brushed off the sand and set it on a low crate where she could see it, as though returning a borrowed thing. That night, the glove disappeared again. Mateo laughed softly when he heard. She's got you trained. She's had better material to work with, Elias said. On the 4th evening, Claire called. Elias told her Sable was back, hurt but sheltered, and that Celia was guiding everything. He expected worry, maybe a lecture. Instead, Claire grew quiet. Dad, she said, you sound tired. I am, but not empty. He looked toward the barn lantern, its softened glow trembling in the dusk. Under the hay shed, Sable shifted, unseen but present. No, he said after a while, not empty. The words surprised him. They did not mean he was healed. They did not mean Marion's chair was easier to pass or that Claire's old room no longer held dust in the shape of years. They meant only that care had returned to the ranch in a form he could not hold, command, or keep. Maybe that made it truer. That night, before going inside, Elias placed fresh water near the hollow and stepped back. In the dimness, Sable's eyes opened. She did not hiss. She did not blink either. She simply watched him leave. For a wild creature, that was trust enough. For a lonely man, it was almost more than he knew how to receive. The secret under the hay shed announced itself with a sound so small, Elias almost blamed the wind. It came just after sunrise on the 6th morning of Sable's recovery. A faint, rasping peep from the shaded hollow behind the shed. Elias had been carrying fresh water toward the pump, moving slowly because cold still lingered in the handle. The ranch smelled of damp hay, sun-warmed dust, and the weak coffee he had forgotten on the porch rail. Roscoe trotted beside him with the solemn importance of a dog who had been trusted with silence for nearly a week. The peep came again. Roscoe stopped. Elias stopped too. From the hollow, Sable's amber eyes appeared in the dark. They were not dull with exhaustion now. They were bright, sharp, and fixed on him with a warning so clear he felt it in his boots. Her torn left ear tilted forward. Her whiskers spread. One forepaw rested over the old leather glove she had dragged back beneath the overhang, claws hidden but ready. Elias lowered the bucket to the ground without a sound. Then, behind Sable's shoulder, something moved. A tiny shape shifted in the hay shadows, then another, then a third. For a long moment, Elias did not understand what he was seeing. The morning narrowed to the smell of dust, the creak of the windmill, and the quick beat inside his chest. 3 bobcat kittens were tucked against Sable's body, their spotted coats softer and grayer than hers, their ears still too large for their heads. One had a pale smudge across its nose. One pushed its face blindly against Sable's side. The smallest tried to climb over the glove and slid backward in a tumble of paws. Roscoe made a noise like a kettle swallowing a whistle. Sable's head snapped toward him. Elias lifted 2 fingers. Roscoe sat carefully. He looked carved from red clay, though his tail betrayed him with one helpless sweep through the dust. "Not a word," Elias whispered. The dog closed his mouth with heroic pain. Elias backed away. He did not call Celia until he reached the porch. His hands shook so badly, the foam merely slipped from his fingers. He had found calves born in storms and quail nests under broken boards. But this was not a domestic surprise in a human place. This was a wild mother, wounded and worn thin, who had led danger away from her young, then returned to the one ranch where distance had been honored. When Celia answered, Elias said only, "There are kittens." She was quiet for half a breath. "How many?" "3. "Are they moving?" "Yes." "Is Sable alert?" "Very." "Good. Don't approach again. I'll come by, but we may mostly leave them alone." Elias looked through the screen door toward the hay shed. Sable's eyes were still visible from the shadow, watching the house. "I know," he said, but knowing did not stop the tears. They came without warning, a sudden warmth that blurred the yard, the barn, the lantern nail, the pale line of the wash beyond. Elias turned his face away. Oh, no one stood close enough to see. He pressed the heel of one hand against his eyes and breathed through it. He had not cried when the drainpipe opened. He had not cried during the search, though worry had scraped him hollow. He had not cried in front of Claire after Marion's funeral, because Claire had needed a father who could remember where the car was parked. But the sight of those 3 small wild lives under his hayshed broke some quiet rule inside him. Sable had not come back for herself alone. She had come back because she had young, hidden in the dark. And somehow, in all his careful not asking, not reaching, not claiming, Elias had become part of the edge of their safety. That was more trust than he had ever meant to receive. Celia arrived an hour later with Mateo, and they watched from far off through binoculars. The kittens were not newborns, but young enough to stay close, still clumsy in their little bodies. Sable had likely sheltered them in a hidden den farther out before the coyotes, storm damage, injury, or disturbance had forced her to move. The glove, Celia guessed, might have carried the scent of a place Sable had begun to associate with low threat. Or perhaps Sable simply liked stealing it. "Let's not make her too poetic," Celia said gently. Elias wiped his face with his sleeve. Too late. Mateo pretended not to notice. He occupied himself by offering Roscoe a biscuit, which Roscoe accepted with the grave expression of a public servant enduring hardship. When one kitten squeaked from the hollow, Roscoe dropped half the biscuit in surprise, then stared at it as if betrayed by his own mouth. Elias handed it back. "You'll survive." Roscoe seemed unconvinced. They made a plan that looked almost like doing nothing. No extra lights, no crowding, no feeding near the kittens, except what Celia recommended for Sable's recovery, and only in a way that would not keep them dependent. Water stayed where Sable expected it. The camera remained distant. Mateo agreed to avoid the service path. Elias would keep Roscoe close and the barn quiet. By late afternoon, the smallest kitten wandered into a sliver of sun at the edge of the overhang. It placed one paw on a straw stem, startled when the stem moved, and pounced sideways with fierce, ridiculous courage. Sable reached out without rising and hooked the kitten back with one gentle foreleg. The motion undid Elias all over again. He stood beside the barn wall, hat held against his chest, tears drying cool on his face. He thought of Marion holding Claire as a baby on that same ranch. He thought of Claire leaving because houses could ache too loudly. He thought of how love kept changing shape, refusing to stay where people first set it down. Under the hayshed, Sable lowered her head and washed one kitten's ear with quick, practical strokes. The kitten objected silently, mouth opening in outrage, too small to hear. Elias let out a broken little laugh. Sable looked toward him once, not soft, not tame, but steady. Then she tucked her chin over her young and closed her eyes halfway, trusting the distance between them to hold. Elias stood in that distance until the sun slid down the barn wall. For the first time in years, the quiet rancher cried without feeling ashamed of being seen by the sky. The ranch changed without ever admitting it had changed. No new fence went up around the hayshed. No sign warned people away. Mateo, who loved a good story at the feed store, kept this one folded carefully behind his teeth. Copperthread Ranch simply began moving with a softer step. Elias rose before dawn, tapped the blue mug twice against the porch rail, and listened. The house still held its old quiet, but the quiet no longer felt like a locked room. Beyond the kitchen window, the barn lantern glowed faintly where he had left it through the cold hours, shaded with tin so it would not bother the wild family tucked near the hay. By then, Sable was stronger. She no longer lay hidden all day. She came out at first light and dusk, placing her left hind leg with care, but no longer dragging it. The kittens followed in uneven bursts, all paws, ears, and bold little mistakes. The one with the pale nose smudge turned out to be the bravest. Celia called that one Dust. Mateo, after pretending he did not name wild animals, called the roundest kitten Button because it had once sat on his boot print as if claiming it. Elias did not name the smallest aloud for a week. Then, after watching it pounce at its own shadow and fall backward into straw, he quietly called it Cricket. He never used the names to summon them. Names were for human tenderness, not wild obedience. Sable kept the rules better than anyone. If a kitten wandered too far toward the barn door, she flattened one ear and gave a low churring sound from deep in her throat. The kitten would freeze, then hurry back, trying to look as if returning had been its own idea. When Roscoe watched too long from the porch, Sable fixed him with such bright contempt that the old dog turned his face away and pretended to inspect a cloud. "You've been judged," Elias told him. Roscoe sighed, as if this had been obvious for weeks. Small joys gathered everywhere. One morning, Dust discovered a fallen mesquite pod and carried it sideways, stumbling over it every 3 steps, but refusing to surrender. Button tried to climb the water bowl, tipped it slightly, startled himself, and sat in the damp patch with solemn regret. Cricket found a loose strand of hay stuck to Sable's tail and followed it so intently that Elias nearly spilled coffee trying not to laugh. Sable did not laugh, of course. She endured motherhood with the fierce, practical patience of a wild creature whose love had claws hidden inside it. She washed each kitten with brisk strokes. She nipped softly when play grew too rough. She moved them twice in one afternoon from the hayshed to the low brush and back again, as if testing every escape route the ranch offered. Celia kept visiting, but less often. She watched from a distance, took notes, and reminded Elias that healthy kittens would one day need to fear humans properly. "That includes you," she said. "I figured. I mean it. So do I." He did mean it, though the truth pressed on him some evenings. The better Sable healed, the less she needed the ranch. The stronger the kittens grew, the more the wash called to them. Elias could feel the coming distance, the way he felt weather in an old break near his wrist. Still, he chose the right thing because love had trained him toward it. He stopped leaving even the small approved food once Sable hunted well. He kept water in the usual place during the hottest afternoons, but sometimes he let the bowl stay empty for part of the day so the kittens would not learn that every thirst ended near a human building. He asked Mateo to drive the lower road slowly. He fixed the broken gate latch until it closed without a snap. He moved the noisy feed barrels away from the hay shed. He taught Roscoe that the two-finger signal meant stillness, no matter how entertaining kittens became. Roscoe suffered nobly. When Cricket tumbled out from under the overhang and stared at him through grass, Roscoe trembled from nose to tail, but did not move. Elias slipped him a biscuit afterward. Roscoe took it gently, then looked toward the hay shed, as if hoping Sable had witnessed his moral achievement. She had. She looked unimpressed. As weeks passed, the kittens changed from soft bundles into little hunters. Their steps grew quieter. Their pounces grew less ridiculous. They practiced on beetles, seed heads, leaves, and once on Elias's shadow when he stood too close to the low sun. Dust sprang, landed inside the stretched shape of his hat, and immediately fled from the victory. Elias stood still, smiling down at the dirt. The air had cooled by then. November light arrived thin and honey-colored, laying long shadows across the corrals. Mornings smelled of frost, hay, and coffee. At night, stars sharpened above the dark outline of the mountains. The ranch held 4 kinds of silence now: the old silence of memory, the working silence of chores, the watchful silence of wild animals nearby, and the new quiet that came after laughter. Claire visited on a Saturday with groceries, a patched jacket, and a careful expression. Elias met her by the porch and raised one finger to his lips before pointing toward the wash. They watched from the broken step. Sable stood under the mesquite with her kittens around her. She looked toward Claire, ears high, body balanced to leave. Claire's face changed slowly. The guarded city tiredness fell away, and something like the girl who once held a lizard in both hands returned. "Oh, Dad," she whispered. Elias did not answer. Claire reached for his hand, something she had not done in years without a hospital bed or funeral between them. Her fingers were cold. He closed his around them. Sable turned, gave the bowl one sideways push with her paw, and led her kittens into the wash. The gesture felt almost like farewell, though Elias knew better than to decide what a bobcat meant. Still, he watched the 4 spotted shadows disappear through mesquite and stone, and he felt no urge to follow. Copper Thread Ranch had become softer because something wild had trusted it briefly. It was enough to change the way a man opened a gate, carried a ball, answered his daughter, and stood beneath the evening sky. By winter's edge, the kittens had learned the ranch, mostly by leaving it. They came less often to the hay shed and more often to the wash beyond the windmill, where mesquite roots gripped the banks and quail moved like nervous thoughts through the dry grass. Their bodies lengthened, their baby roundness sharpened into muscle and caution. Dust no longer charged every moving leaf. Button placed each paw carefully before pouncing, as if dignity had finally found him. Cricket, still small, could vanish into one shadow and appear from another with a confidence that startled even Roscoe. Sable watched all of it from a distance that belonged to her. Her limp had faded to a memory, noticeable only when the morning cold stiffened her. The torn notch in her left ear had healed into a permanent mark, and the pale broken whisker had finally fallen away, replaced by a shorter one that gave her face a new, uneven wisdom. She still turned the water bowl when she used it, though she used it less. Sometimes she passed it without drinking and nudged it sideways anyway, as if leaving Elias a sign that she had inspected the household and found it barely acceptable. Elias treasured those corrections. He never said so aloud. December came clear and cold. Frost silvered the troughs before sunrise, then vanished under a pale gold sun. The mountains stood sharp against the morning. Smoke from the stove drifted low and blue before lifting. The ranch smelled of hay, coffee, and clean winter dust. Claire visited more often that season. Not every weekend, but enough that her old boots stayed by the door and a sweater hung over the back of Marion's chair without anyone moving it. She and Elias spoke quietly on the porch, sometimes about practical things, sometimes about Marion, and sometimes not at all. Silence had changed between them. It was no longer a wall. It was a place where both of them could rest. One evening, Claire found Roscoe asleep with his head on the old leather glove, which Sable had abandoned near the barn weeks before. "He thinks it's his now," she whispered. "He thinks everything becomes his if he naps on it." Roscoe opened one eye, considered the accusation, and returned to sleep with the full confidence of ownership. The last true gathering happened on a calm afternoon after a night of frost. Elias had been repairing a loose hinge on the lower gate. The latch, once sharp and noisy, now closed with a soft, careful click. Claire stood near the porch with the blue mug in her hands, warming her fingers. The barn lantern hung unlit in daylight, its glass clean for once. Roscoe raised his head first. Then Sable appeared at the edge of the wash. Elias set down his wrench. She stood in full sun, not hidden, not hurried. Behind her, one by one, the three young bobcats emerged from the skeet shade. Dust came first, long-legged and alert. Button followed, pausing to sniff a stone as if it might hold important ranch news. Cricket slipped last from the brush and batted at a dry leaf before remembering to look serious. Claire's breath caught. Elias did not move. Sable looked across the yard at him. The distance between them was the same distance it had always been, made of respect, caution, and something warmer than either. She did not blink. She did not step closer. She only stood with her healed body between the ranch and the wild wash. And for a moment, Elias understood that this was not a visit for water or shelter. This was the end of needing either. The kittens milled around her, bright-eyed and restless. Dust pounced once at Cricket's tail and received a swift little cuff from Sable that restored order. Button sat down in the exact center of the path and scratched behind one ear with deep concentration. Roscoe made a small aching sound from the porch, overcome by the injustice of being asked not to join such obvious activity. "Stay," Claire whispered, though Elias had not spoken. Roscoe stayed. Elias felt proud of them both. Sable turned her head toward the mesquite wash, then back toward Elias. Her left ear, with its rough notch, caught the low sun. He thought of the drainpipe, the scrape in the dark, the first pan of water, the lantern, the glove, the tiny kittens under hay shadow. He thought of Marion's hand in his, Claire's child fingers around a lizard, the long years when he believed love ended by leaving. Now he knew better. Sometimes love left because it had grown strong enough to go. His eyes stung, but the tears came quietly. He did not wipe them away. Claire slipped her hand into his, and he held it without looking down. "Good girl," he said softly, not as a command, not as a claim, only as a blessing offered to the space between them. Sable's ears flicked at the sound. For one breath, she lowered her eyelids. Then she turned. The kittens followed in an uneven line. Dust vanished first, then Button after one backward glance at the barn, then Cricket with a final sideways hop over a root. Sable went last. At the edge of the wash, she paused beside the enamel bowl. She did not drink. She placed one paw against the rim and turned it sideways. Then the mesquite closed around her. Elias stood until the branches stopped moving. The sun lowered behind the barn, and the lantern glass caught a brief flare of orange, as if already remembering night. Roscoe sighed and rested his chin on the porch step. Claire leaned against Elias's shoulder. No one spoke for a long time. There was nothing to add. The ranch had not kept Sable. That had never been the promise. It had given her a place to survive, to heal, to hide her young, and to leave when leaving meant life. In return, she had given Elias the strange mercy of being trusted without being needed forever. That evening, he filled the blue mug and tapped it twice against the porch rail. The day was almost over, but it let him in anyway. Long after the 4 spotted shadows disappeared, Copperthread Ranch kept small traces of them in ordinary places. The enamel bowls stayed near the wash, sometimes filled after a hard, hot day, sometimes turned upside down so rain would not gather dust in it. The lantern still hung by the barn door, and on winter evenings, Elias lit it for himself, for Roscoe, for Claire when she visited, and maybe a little for any wild eyes watching from farther out than he could see. The glove remained on the workbench. Roscoe slept on it when no one stopped him. Claire teased her father that the dog had inherited Sable's worst habit, stealing only things that looked useless and then making them important. As seasons passed, Elias did not tell the story loudly. He told it softly, when someone needed to hear that grease could open without breaking, or that kindness did not always end with keeping. He would mention the drainpipe, the notched ear, the bowl turned sideways in the sand. Then he would grow quiet, because the best part of the story had always belonged to silence. And sometimes, near dusk, a bobcat would cross the far ridge above the wash. Maybe it was Sable, maybe one of her grown young, maybe only the desert reminding him not to hold too tightly to what was passing through. Still, Elias always watched with a gentle heart. And if you have stayed with this story until the last lantern glow, thank you. May the night around you feel softer now. May you remember the animal that once changed your life, whether it stayed beside you or only passed through for a season. Rest well, friends. Somewhere beyond the porch light, the desert is breathing, the mesquite is still, and a wild mother with a torn ear is moving silently home. End of story. Sleep gently, friends.